The Overwatch League MVP conversation is well underway. Heck, that's what my last video was about. And of those guys, some are very deserving and are getting a lot of praise within the community for having a superstar level season. But with the MVP ballot only comes 10 guys who may or may not be deserving, and it leaves out a lot of other guys that deserve a lot of credit for the years they put out. Particularly, every single team has at least one of those guys that puts up extreme value and means absolutely everything to their campaign, win or loss. They're the guys who carry the burden and are the foundation of what gives this team any sort of life whatsoever. With this year's MVP conversation has come a lot of people complaining and talking about robbery, and some guys not getting the credit they actually deserve, and doing this type of video is a way to fix that and give these guys their due justice. I made one of these videos last year and y'all really seemed to like it, so we're back with another one for 2023. Today I present to you my MVP for every single team. Starting out with Atlanta Reign, you can go with pretty much any starter in that roster outside of like Donghack. Lip, Stalker, Chio, and Fielder are all excellent options, but if you know me, you already know that I'm heading slightly towards Fielder as the MVP of the Atlanta Reign. It's not by a wide margin by any stretch, but in my honest opinion, he has done just a little bit more than these other guys when it comes to consistency and really putting the team on his back and keeping them stable. Sometimes it may come quietly behind the scenes, but Fielder oftentimes is the unsung hero of this Reign team and is the guy that enables everyone to do what they're able to do on this team. He's kind of the orchestrator behind all of these guys doing their jobs properly. He puts himself in very strong positions that allow for him to keep his teammates up for the maximum amount of time compared to some of these other more aggressive flex support players. And yet, he still finds the same kind of value with his cooldowns and stepping up and clutching when the game is on the line. There's a lot of big playmakers on Atlanta Reign, but it starts with Fielder being able to put them in that position to succeed and be in a stable environment where they can trust him to do their thing, play aggressively, knowing that he has their back. It's a very underrated aspect of why the Atlanta Reign are so good. It feels like in all of the most important moments of this year that Fielder has arguably been their brightest star, so I see no reason why he shouldn't be their MVP, although again, you could give it to a lot of different guys on here, and they all have pretty good arguments. Boston Uprising. You could probably go with one of two guys. You're either in the Decay camp or the Twilight camp. I personally am slightly in the Twilight camp, as it feels like ever since he assumed that starting role and took that away from Izayaki for, well, you know, a couple different reasons, Boston have just been a different kind of team. They've been a lot more explosive and exciting to watch, and it just feels like whenever he gets the starting nod on the Ana, that Boston become more of a threat, and their game gets elevated to that level that puts them in that conversation as one of the top level teams. If it weren't for him, Boston would probably be lagging behind this year, as in order to be a top team, you've got to have a really good support line, and his play has obviously carried that back line hard, so Twilight feels like the correct option here. Dallas Fuel, Hanbin. I think a good argument can also be made for Bliss. He's been pretty consistent for Dallas Fuel, but Hanbin has been the star playmaker of this team throughout the entire season. People like Sparkle and Edison have recently stepped up their games in the summer stage, but comparatively speaking, if you look throughout this entire year, Hanbin has always shown up and has been the primary playmaker and most consistent, stable piece that allows for Dallas to have any sort of chance in some of these matches. His strong mechanics and overall carry potential on the tank role has translated well into heroes like D.Va, Junker Queen, and Ramatra. In a year where Dallas haven't necessarily been able to always keep up on the so-called meta picks with Winston, they've been able to find ways around it, largely because of Hanbin and how easy he can make the game for them, even if he's not that comfortable on Winston. They still fully trust in playing around this guy and his comfort picks, and it just goes to show that he's the leader and they need him to be strong in order to succeed. Florida Mayhem, someone. I'd say this one is fairly easy. The Mayhem, as I've said time after time, are a pretty well-rounded roster. They're super strong from top to bottom, but someone is kind of the guy that keeps it all together. He's the glue for this team. In a similar light to Hanbin, the Mayhem center all of their game plan strictly around him and his flexibility. Dude's one of the top MVP candidates for a reason. Someone takes the tank game to a different level, and in my opinion, he has by far and none been the best tank in the league. What he brings to this Mayhem team just gives them so many options and honestly gives them a leg up over most, if not all, teams. Every team seems to have that one weakness, something they're really not that good at, but you never get that feeling with the Mayhem, and it's largely thanks to someone who always seems to be in his comfort zone no matter what tank they're asking him to play. It makes him so viable for literally any setting on any map. I said it in the last video, and I'll repeat myself here. Someone has the tank role down to an actual science, and this is what it looks like to unlock your full potential on this role. In Overwatch 2, tank play is arguably more critical than it's ever been before, because in a lot of instances, like on Florida Mayhem, as a solo tank, as the only guy on your team on the position, a lot of the responsibility of being able to adapt and play whatever the team needs is gonna fall on you and you alone, and someone has never let that pressure get to him. Limitations on tank play can often be the downfall of Overwatch teams, even in the Overwatch League, but Florida never have to suffer from that, and it's all because of someone and how much he can open up the game. He is one of the most valuable players, not just on his team, but in the league, period, so the choice is pretty easy. Guangzhou Charge. I mean, if you can only pick a player that's currently on their team, I'd maybe lean towards like Xerneas or Farway, but generally, I'd say if you look at the season as a whole, that the easy MVP pick for the Charge is Choi Se-wan. A strong argument can be made that Choi was maybe the best damage dealer in the Eastern Conference. Choi showed even more growth in 2023 and was an extremely good playmaker on both Tracer and Genji. His carry potential was through the roof, and a lot of the time, it felt like if Choi couldn't get it into gear, that the Charge were guaranteed to lose. That's how much he kind of meant towards their early season success. Whenever he didn't have a great game, or he wasn't like the best player in the entire lobby, the Charge were losing. They were like a decent team overall, but obviously Choi was the thing that kept them together. If you look at their performances, compared to now, compared to then, it all revolves around him. They haven't been the same since he's left, and they'll never recover. Hangzhou Spark. I feel like this is a bit more difficult, as it's kind of been a well-balanced approach from this group between a couple of different guys, but if I had to pick one, I think I'd lean towards Leave. Like Choi, Leave has also been one of the top DPS players in the East. Another guy you could maybe argue was the best. I probably wouldn't, but he's definitely up there. He's had a lot of classic Leave performances on the Tracer this year, sometimes really kicking it into a different gear, like we saw in that Colosseo game against Dreamers that one time. When he's feeling it, he can be the best player in the game still. Even though Shy's been pretty good on Sombra, obviously when you have him on that role instead of like a Hanzo or a Hitscan, he's just not going to play up to his full potential, and in those instances, Leave has done a really good job of stepping up and taking over that primary playmaking duty, not missing a beat, and keeping his team afloat even though Shy isn't able to do his typical carry things every single game. Also, Leave feels like the only guy that has consistently looked comfortable even as he's had to make swaps. People like Shy sometimes struggle off of the hit scan and the snipers. You have Gushue, who isn't necessarily the best off of Winston, etc. But with Leave, you don't really get that feeling all that often. He can play the Tracer, or the Echo, or the Mei, and he's never really missed a beat, and I think that's something that I appreciate about him. He at least gives the Spark some life, and gives them a chance when they may have to swap onto things that are a bit out of their comfort zone. Leave pretty much raises this team's potential single-handedly at times, and he definitely deserves some praise. Houston Outlaws. In a year where support play has meant everything, if you're trying to be at that super elite level, I'd say that Shu makes a really strong case as the Outlaws MVP. They've been one of the top teams in the league this year, and have been able to combat a team like Atlanta Reign, who are practically impossible to stop if you don't have stars at the level of Chio and Fielder. But Shu and Violet have largely been able to do so, and I think Shu has taken it a step further by arguably being the league's best flex support, depending on who you're talking to. Just pure domination no matter what this guy touches. His Ana has been absolutely unreal, super aggressive, always landing those big time cooldowns, and with Baptiste, I think yet again for like the third year in a row, he has been the strongest individually, like with mechanics and playmaking by a country mile. Everybody knows it, but Shu actually elevates this Outlaws team to that championship contender level. A lot of what they're able to do and who they're able to compete with starts with him in that backline. London Spitfire, Sparker. There's really no other choice if we're talking about the Spitfire. Hadi obviously has not been as strong for this team this year. There's been a lot of games where they've had to play Winston, and he just hasn't looked that great. He's looked really good on the Rhine still, of course. I mean, that is a given. But if you're looking at the season as a whole, I feel like Sparker is the man to go with. In a year where sometimes tank play has absolutely plagued them, and there's been a constant revolving door at flex support and flex DPS, Sparker has been that constant that has given them life through both the good and the bad. Even through London's inconsistencies, he's still been a star playmaker who can make the huge plays. He showed us that carry potential when they sucked, and he has continued to show it as they've gotten better, and they've given him more space to do his thing. He hasn't always looked the most comfortable in the dive setup, but whenever London avoid it, which is pretty often, his Hangzhou, his Cassidy, as well as his Symmetra have all been super strong, and he is showing that he is still an elite DPS player at the Overwatch League level. Through all of the good and all of the dark times, this is a guy that London have been able to count on to keep them in games and oftentimes win them games. LA Gladiators, Kevster. I mean, probably one of the easiest choices in this entire video, right? For a long time, Lastra also had a decent argument, but recently he disappeared, and Kevster has always been a presence there, and we all kind of know what he's meant for this team this year, I'd say. When they were still competitive, rip to Glad's fans' hopes and dreams, Kevster was going demon mode on the Tracer left and right. It was absolutely horrifying what this guy was putting on display. He felt like an early season MVP candidate, and sometimes he was going so crazy that Glads were able to overcome strong teams that they definitely shouldn't have been able to. I'm looking at you, Florida Mayhem, as Kevster did it to you not once, but twice. With all the struggles going on with Tank, and with Yaki and Kai not being the best supporting cast, and the support line constantly changing, Kevster's like the only thing that seems to stay the same, and can at least put up some decent performances no matter the scenario, so Kevster all the way here for Gladiators. Pretty much the only bright spot they have right now. LA Valiant. You already know that we're going with our boy Seeker. That guy has been a superstar on one of the worst teams in the entire league's history, let alone this year. It's kind of terrifying how much he can drag up this team's ceiling all by himself. His signature Sojourn and Hangzhou have been out of this world, and in spite of being at a disadvantage, there have been moments where he has overwhelmed some seriously good DPS players on noticeably better teams, such as the Florida DPS or Kevster. The Valiant live and die by Seeker, and they can only go as far as they carry him, and he opens up the game so much when he's in his element and when he's feeling it. I mean, he had the biggest deadlift on a map in Overwatch League history this year, and if you don't know what a flat deadlift is, it's when you get 50% or more of your team's final blows in a single map, and he put up a damn near 150% deadlift against the Mayhem on Shambali Monastery. On a team that's literally not supposed to be winning, that's pretty ridiculous that he's able to do such a thing and propel them to actual wins when they're projected to maybe only get like one at most. He's done absolutely everything to make this Valiant team into something that's at least respectable, and he deserves all the attention in the world for it. NYXL Creative. This is a guy that sometimes flies under the radar. Creative is someone that I've criticized in the past, and I open up to that. There have been times where I feel like he's just disappeared on the Seoul Dynasty throughout the years, and that his hero pool maybe hasn't been the greatest. But on NYXL this year, I have nothing but good things to say. Sometimes it's a bit hard to notice him, as the media is constantly giving attention to like Kellen with his player of the matches, or Fitz for the sometimes Sombra diffs that he gives out, but Creative is always that guy that's controlling everything from the shadows, making sure people are in the right place, place, and honestly doing a lot of the dirty work himself, with huge openings both as a support player and as a mechanical beast. When this team is winning, you really feel it, and when they're losing, you might even feel his presence even more, as you start to feel bad for him when they're losing games it feels like they shouldn't, like that match against the Shock that one time. He carries this team on the regular with his flexibility and with his mechanics. This dude has been a nasty Ana, a nasty BAP, and Kiriko, which I'd argue he's maybe even the best at in the entire league. We've seen super clutch windows, some big time headshots, he does it all. And on top of that, he definitely makes the team around him a lot better. There's been a lot of universal praise about Kellen looking a lot better this year, and I think a lot of it has to do with creative and what he's doing behind the scenes. And that's what makes somebody truly valuable. Not just carrying the team around you, but uplifting them and making them better as well. San Francisco Shock. It's just proper. There's no need to think very hard about this. The Shock have been so inconsistent this year. There have been times where they've looked so lifeless and so confused, and through it all, Proper still drags this team kicking and screaming to the finish line. Proper rage mode is very real, where he knows there's these moments where his team looks so bad and out of shape, but they're losing to these teams that they just shouldn't, and he decides to take over the game by himself. He gets so angry that his team is not playing well that he just kills everything in sight, friend or foe. Additionally, a lot of what the Shock try and do is centered around him. I remember when they first came back from the break, after making the roster changes, they were deciding to fully just pocket him with their new backline. It was all about enabling Proper as much as humanly possible with mercy pockets and playing super safe to make sure he's alive, giving him all of the resources. That's what this guy means to this team. You go all in on him because you know that is the best chance you have to win, and that is like the textbook definition of a carry and an MVP. Seoul Dynasty, Prophet. Outside of Proper in the Shock or Seeker in the Valiant, I don't know if there's a bigger no-brainer out there. I don't think there's a single instance I can think of outside of when he was taking a break where Prophet has not been the leader of his team and sometimes even the leader of the entire lobby. Seoul Dynasty have been painfully mid this year, but one guy who has never looked mid, who's always been a star through and through, has been Prophet. Even when they are getting blown out, he is doing everything to drag this team back. With Hangzhou, with Tracer, it's non-stop with him. He just refuses to lose, even when sometimes he knows that the effort is futile. And as the Dynasty have started to improve, Prophet has as well. He's only gotten stronger as the season has progressed, almost like he's gotten his mojo, confidence, and motivation back. Most guys on this Dynasty roster have just been forgettable, but Prophet is always there to remind you of himself, and he just puts in a lot more effort than everybody else around him, so credit goes where it's due. Shout out to Prophet for not giving up, even when his team is just not very good. Seoul Infernal. I mean, pick your poison, right? You want to go with Mag, Zest, Skewed, all excellent choices. But just based off of his domination compared to the other support players in the region, I'd say that Skewed is Seoul Infernal's MVP. I think he has by far been the best support in that region. I know that support overall has been rather weak, some may even consider it a joke, but just for success reasons alone, that's been really important for Seoul Infernal to have that advantage. Skewed has given that to them, and he deserves praise. Skewed had an opportunity to get away from Shu's shadow and prove his real potential, and he has thrived from it. He has reveled in this glory, and he's winning a positional battle quite easily as a result, and it's a big reason why Seoul Infernal have been so fun to watch and have been so consistent over there. When you're so obviously the best player at your specific position, it's just really hard to make an argument for anybody else over him. You definitely can, but just based off of support and how meaningful it has been this year for a team's success, I'd say that Skewed is the best choice. For the Shanghai Dragons, we're going with Viper. This rookie has been sensational. He came into the league mostly known for his Genji, and he has transformed his game into something completely different and has been one of the most respectable DPS in the league, let alone the East. He may be a newcomer and a young player, but but don't let that deceive you. If you've watched any Shanghai games this year, then you'll catch my drift. He's been super explosive for this team even when they've sucked, and he's only looked better as the rest of his team has improved, and his pulse bomb stick percentage is really high. I wouldn't be surprised if it's actually the highest in the league. There's been more than one occasion where it's been in that 70% area, if not higher. He's shown some crazy flashes as a rookie, and despite being so young, he has most certainly been the most consistent and reliable player on a very up and down Shanghai Dragons team. Toronto Defiant. If we're going off the modern day Defiant, you might be able to make an argument for like Spectra or maybe Hydron, but one guy I think that stands out the most, if we're looking at this entire season as a whole, through all the stuff that's going on with the roster changes, I think it's gotta be Ultraviolet. In my opinion, he's been the only real player on this squad from start to finish who hasn't really been struggling that much at any point. The new guys have obviously been pretty good, but when you look at somebody like Ultraviolet, who's been here since the very beginning, this guy has seen some stuff, and through it all, he's always been a guy the team can count on. It feels to me like all of the other core pieces that have been there have had to go through certain struggles. They've had mountains to climb. You think about Hydron and how he hasn't been the best Sombra player. You think of Kaluj and not being the greatest Winston. You think about OG and his positional struggles before getting kicked out, or speedily with the Tracer. But you never really had any true criticisms for Ultraviolet. Win or loss, when those big matches come around, Ultraviolet has always locked in and has been extremely impressive. Ultraviolet rarely has any off days, and I just think that ability to stay consistent through all the stuff that Defiant has gone through this year makes him the standout player and arguably the most important. Vancouver Titans. They're another one of those teams where it feels like a true collaborative effort, where everybody seems to be a star playmaker in their own right, but their rookie Sugar Free has definitely been a standout, a really cool feel-good story, and just a solid flex player who's done a lot on both ends, often switching between the Tracer, the Sombra, and the Echo, and just making this Titans team feel more comfortable in a big variety of scenarios, while simultaneously being their big playmaker. Now that Heesang's there, that responsibility is being shared a bit more, but Sugar Free overall from the very start until now has always been on. Lenny Time is the real deal. He can just do so much for you. And the great thing is, he never looks uncomfortable out there. It's kind of like the same situation as someone over in Florida, where you can always revolve your game plan around this guy. He's always going to be able to play what you need him to at the highest level possible. Again, with how dive heavy it's been this year, that flip-flopping between Tracer and Sombra without missing a beat has been absolutely massive, but then he can whip out an Echo, or a Genji, a Mei, even a Sojourn recently, and still find some kind of impact to help make the game go more on your side. Sugar Free is the exact definition of what you want in a flex DPS, and sometimes he even goes underappreciated to me, so we're going to give Lenny the flowers that he deserves here, and give him MVP of Vancouver. The Vegas Eternal. Ugh, I really don't want to pick anyone with how terrible they are, but when looking at how close they've gotten to actually winning and having some kind of relevance, I'd argue that Knife has been their MVP. It was Dove early on, but when they truly got close, Knife was at the center of it all. He's flexed his talents on ping, at least for a little bit, on this terrible team with no real synergy or hope whatsoever, and has kept them in some games, and has won them some maps almost by himself at times. We saw it in the Valiant game. He was taking over that one early on, but then they subbed him out for a map and disrupted the flow, and they let Seeker get hot, and then he just couldn't regain control. It was not his fault at all, and a lot of people would argue if he never got subbed out, they'd probably win that series. And then you think about the Boston game as well, and how he was actually outplaying a guy like Decay on Tracer, despite being on ping on a way worse team. Knife a lot of the time has been probably the only reason why you'd even consider tuning into a Vegas game. Pretty much all the light and hope whatsoever has been instilled in this one man, so it goes without saying that he might be the biggest MVP of all. And last, but certainly not least, for the Washington Justice is none other than alphaYE, who rightfully should have been on the MVP ballot, but unfortunately got snuffed, but he will not not be getting snuffed in this video, as this dude deserves all the credit in the world for an excellent season in his best year as a pro yet. There's been so many games where it feels like it's improbable for the Justice to have any kind of chance just for alphayi to swoop in on the Tracer, the Genji, the Echo, whatever it may be, and absolutely blast away the competition in fights that the Justice have absolutely no right winning. He's done it so many times, man. It's unreal what he can do for this Justice squad and how much he boosts them from the playmaking department. He's a star of the game, he's underrated, underappreciated, and the textbook definition of value. For a lot of people, alphayi is exactly what an MVP is supposed to be. It's not just about finding success, but more so how much you can raise your team's ceiling. And then comparatively speaking, when you look at his performance compared to the rest of the teams, it becomes so clear and so transparent as to why the Justice are where they are today. alphayi came into this year with something to prove out west, and he has passed with flying colors as the clear, bona fide leader and superstar playmaker of a Washington Justice team trying to make the playoffs. And that, my friends, is my personal MVP for all 19 franchises. Obviously, some of these teams are a lot more up for debate than others, but it's always fun to go back and give credit to some of these other guys that aren't going to get the attention they deserve because the MVP ballot is so limiting. What do you think of my list, and who would you advocate for your favorite team? And how does your list change compared to mine? Let me know all your thoughts down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to stay up to date with new Overwatch League content every single week, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to my channel if you're new. Thank you all for watching, I appreciate y'all tons, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.